My name is Neil. I was 19 when I got the motorcycle, and for a while I thought that machine meant my life had finally started moving in the right direction. It was not some fancy bike. It was the kind of thing an older man with money would laugh at. A basic motorcycle I got through a consortium plan after months of waiting and hoping my number would come up. But to me, it felt huge. It was the first thing I had ever won with my own name on it. The first thing that made me feel less like a kid, standing in everybody else's shadow, and more like a man with somewhere to go. That Saturday, I rode out to visit my cousin Tyler because I wanted an excuse to be seen on it. That is the truth. I told myself I was going because we had not seen each other in a while, but really, I wanted to pull up, kill the engine, and watch somebody in the family look impressed for once. I remember the heat rising off the road, the way the handlebars buzzed in my hands, the little private grin I could not stop wearing every time I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Tyler was not home when I got there. Neither was my uncle. I almost turned right back around, but my cousin Kayla was sitting on the porch with a girl I'd never seen before, and the second Kayla introduced us, leaving, stopped sounding like a good idea. The girl's name was Rachel. She was young, maybe 15 or 16 at most, and I knew that difference mattered. I knew it the second Kayla said her name, and the second Rachel lifted her face toward me and pushed her hair back with one hand like she had all the time in the world. But there are moments that hit you before your good sense has time to get in front of them. She had light brown skin, a soft mouth, dark eyes that held on a little longer than they needed to, and this quiet way of looking at me that made the whole porch feel smaller. Kayla and I had never been especially close. We were family, but not the kind who stayed up late talking or told each other everything. We were around the same orbit, and that was about it. That afternoon only became one of those rare, glowing memories because Rachel was there, sitting sideways in a cheap plastic chair, laughing at things that were not even that funny, and looking at me with enough curiosity to make me stay. I talked to both of them, but that is not really what happened. What really happened was that I spent the whole afternoon trying not to make it obvious that every time Rachel looked away, I waited for her to look back. She lived next door to my aunt. At some point, her mother called from inside, and Rachel stood up in that reluctant way people do when they want to pretend they are not disappointed to leave. Before she stepped off the porch, I asked if she wanted to go for a ride the next day. I tried to sound casual. I asked like it had just occurred to me. She looked at Kayla first, then back at me, and smiled in this small, careful way that told me she was saying yes before she actually said it. She told me she would be waiting. That answer stayed with me all the way home. Before she left, she kissed me on the cheek. It was innocent enough that nobody could have made anything of it, but I felt it all through my body. I stayed a while longer after she went inside, talking to Kayla about nothing and steering the conversation back toward Rachel every chance I got. I wanted to know everything fast, which was ridiculous because the truth was I barely knew her and had already started building a version of her in my head. That was when Kayla warned me. She said Rachel's father was hard, the kind of man people kept their voice down around. She told me he was strict about everything, especially his daughter, and that if I thought I was just going to roll up and start seeing her openly, I was wrong. I brushed it off the way young men brush off almost every warning that threatens something they want. In my mind, strict fathers belonged in other people's stories. I had a bike, she had smiled at me, and the world seemed simple enough that Saturday for me to believe those were the only two facts that mattered. The next afternoon, I borrowed an extra helmet from a friend and rode back out there after lunch. Rachel and I had agreed she would meet me at the corner instead of in front of her house. That should have told me something about the kind of trouble waiting behind all of this. But at 19, secrecy can feel less like danger and more like romance. She was already there when I arrived. I can still see her stepping off the curb and walking toward me with that nervous smile, acting calm while glancing once over her shoulder. When she climbed on behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, I had one of those stupid, pure moments where you think, this is it. This is what I was supposed to be doing all along. We rode to a park on the other side of town, spread out under a tree because the sun was hard that day, and for a few minutes we just sat there on the grass looking at each other with the kind of silence that belongs only to people on the edge of something. I told her she was beautiful. I told her I had not stopped thinking about her since the day before. I meant it, and she could tell. Her whole face changed when I said it. Then I leaned in and kissed her, and once that first kiss happened, the rest of the afternoon seemed to fall into place around it. She had a bright smile and a softness that made me reckless. We kissed again and again, the kind of kissing that makes time feel slippery. She admitted she had been thinking about me, too. I drove her back before it got late, because she said her father watched the clock and would start asking questions if she stayed out too long. That was how it started. For the next 4 months, weekends belonged to us, in whatever stolen form we could manage. I would pick her up when I could. We would ride around, stop at parks, little food places, empty side streets where we could talk without anybody breathing down our necks. Everything had to happen around her parents' rules, especially her father's, which meant everything good came wrapped in caution. Sometimes she would show up already tense, already half looking back toward home. Sometimes she would laugh and relax after 10 minutes on the bike, like the sound of that engine, and the wind in her face could make her forget who was waiting for her. I started falling for her faster than I wanted to admit. That part was not complicated. The complicated part was what it meant. Because we were not just sneaking around for fun, we were sneaking because her father would never have allowed it. She was underage. He controlled where she went, who she saw, how long she was gone, and even the way people around her were expected to behave. Rachel never talked about him in long speeches, but she did not need to. I could hear him in the way she checked the time. I could hear him in the way she lowered her voice when talking about home. I could hear him in the way she sometimes went quiet for no reason in the middle of a good afternoon, as if part of her never fully left that house. I should have understood then that I was not just getting involved with a girl. I was stepping into a fight with a man who saw his daughter less as a person and more as something under lock. One afternoon I went by my uncle's place and found Kayla in the yard looking shaken. She told me Rachel's father had found out about us. She did not know exactly how, only that somehow our weekends had stopped being a secret and turned into the kind of thing a man like him took personally. Rachel was grounded. She was not allowed out. According to Kayla, the punishment had not stopped with Rachel either. Her father had come over angry because Kayla was my cousin, and apparently that made her guilty by association. I felt sick hearing it, but before I could even ask what I was supposed to do, Kayla looked over my shoulder and went pale. Rachel's father was standing by the fence. He did not shout. That almost made it worse. He crooked 2 fingers at me, calling me over like a man summoning somebody he had already decided was beneath him. I was scared. I do not mind saying that now. I walked over anyway because I did not know what else a 19-year-old with too much pride was supposed to do. He asked if I was Neil. In this version of my life, that became my name, because the American neighborhood, the little houses, the fences, the family barbecues, all of it fits that better. But the feeling was the same as the one in the original Truth. I told him yes. He kept his voice low and told me he knew I had been around his daughter. He said she was too young. He said he did not want me near her. Then he leaned a little closer and made sure I understood there would be consequences if he saw me trying again. He did not rant. He did not explain. He said it like a man giving orders on his own property. I stood there listening because he never gave me room to speak. That bothered me more than the warning itself. I wanted to tell him I cared about her. I wanted to tell him I was not messing with her. I wanted to say I had better intentions than he was giving me credit for. But his mind was closed before I opened my mouth. He turned and walked away like the matter was settled. After that, I tried to catch a glimpse of Rachel any way I could. I went by my uncle's place, made excuses, lingered outside, rode past her street slower than I should have. Nothing. She did not come to the window. She did not send word through Kayla. Eventually, even Kayla started telling me her father had tightened things so much that Rachel barely spoke to anybody. He did not want messages passed. He did not want names mentioned. He wanted that chapter ripped out before it had the chance to become a problem he could not control. There is a particular kind of grief in losing something before it ever had the chance to become normal. That was what those months felt like. Not a breakup. Something stranger than that. More like being told a door had existed, then watching somebody brick it up while you were still standing in front of it. I held on longer than I should have. I rode past her house, hoping for a curtain to move. I listened for ways back in. I kept replaying those weekends on the bike as if memory itself could keep them alive. But time does what fathers, fences, and fear are all designed to do. It wears things down. A year passed. By then, Rachel was no longer the first thing I thought of every morning. She was still there, just farther back, like a song you know by heart, but do not hear much anymore. Around that time, I started seeing another girl, Rose. I met her near the warehouse where I worked. She was older than Rachel, closer to me in age, easy to be around, and kind in a grounded way that did not ask much from me except honesty and consistency. What I felt for Rose was not what I had felt for Rachel. Not that instant flash, not that restless pull, but life is not made only of the things that hit you hardest. Sometimes life is made of what stays. Rose stayed. We dated seriously. After about a year and a half, she got pregnant, and suddenly whatever version of youth I still thought I had was gone. We moved in together, though not into some apartment of our own at first. We ended up in my old bedroom at my parents' house because that was what we could afford. I was working, Rose was pregnant, my parents were thrilled about their first grandchild, and in the middle of all that chaos, I found out that wanting to be a man and having to be one were not the same thing at all. When our daughter was born, something in me settled. Not everything, but something. She was beautiful, tiny, loud, and real in a way that made every old fantasy seem childish for a while. I loved being a father. I loved watching my parents hold her. I loved coming home tired and hearing her before I even opened the door. It took us until she was 2 to scrape together enough money for our first apartment. By then I had sold the motorcycle and bought a used car because that was what a family needed more. That whole side of the family, my aunt, uncle, Tyler, Kayla, they faded into the distance as the years got busier. That is not dramatic, it is just what happens. Work, bills, diapers, rent, oil changes, grocery lists, a child with a fever at 2 in the morning. Life narrows your field of vision without asking permission. You look up one day and realize years have slipped by while you were trying to keep the lights on. Then one Sunday, Rose and I took our daughter to my mother's house for lunch, and Kayla was there with my aunt. Seeing her after all that time stirred up things I had not expected. Not because of Kayla herself, but because her face opened a door in my head I had long ago tried to close. We all sat around talking while Rose stayed close enough that I could not ask what I wanted to ask. I had to wait for a moment when Kayla and I ended up near the kitchen doorway alone. I tried to sound casual. I asked about Rachel. Kayla told me Rachel had gotten pregnant by a guy from her neighborhood and moved in with him. She said it had been maybe a year, maybe a little more. I still remember the way the room sounded after that, like all the voices around me had moved farther away even though no one had stopped talking. I had a wife. I had a daughter. I had no right to feel anything sharp about that news. I felt it anyway. It was not simple jealousy. It was bitterness, wounded pride, the old unfinished thing kicking awake again. What hit me hardest was not even that Rachel had moved on. It was the fact that the same father who had acted like I was some danger at his gate had not been able to stop her life from going exactly where he said he had been trying to protect it from going. I wanted to ask him where all that control had gotten him. I wanted to stand in front of him and say, "You kept me away like I was poison. So how did this happen?" I did not do any of that, of course. I went home with Rose and our daughter, put the dishes away afterward, got up for work the next morning, and did what men do when they are trying to outrun a feeling they know they should not feed. I pushed it down. For a while, that worked. Then a few years later, Kayla invited the family to her little boy's first birthday party. She rented a hall not far from my aunt's house. Rose and I went with our daughter because that is what families do, and I knew before we even got there that there was a decent chance Rachel would be invited too. I knew it. I had time to prepare for it. None of that mattered. The second I saw her, my chest locked. She was standing near one of the long tables with a paper plate in one hand, and if I had expected time to make her smaller in my mind, I was wrong. She looked even more beautiful than she had as a teenager, not in some polished magazine way, but in the way real women sometimes carry history in their face and somehow become more striking because of it. She had 2 little boys by then. One of them was barely more than a toddler. Her husband was there too, a man named Mark in this version, the kind of guy people call decent, because he does not say much. Maybe he was, maybe he was not. All I knew was, I hated seeing him beside her. Rachel saw me at almost the exact moment I saw her. That mattered, because it was not one-sided. I know what shock looks like. I know what it looks like when a face loses its practiced expression for a second and something older pushes through. We said hello, asked how each other had been and nothing else because too many people were around. But after that, all through the party, I kept catching her looking at me. Not smiling, not waving, just looking. There are some silences louder than arguments. That party was full of them. I went home restless, irritated with myself, irritated with the whole idea that a woman I had not touched in years could still get under my skin just by standing across a room. I told myself it was old emotion, unfinished business, curiosity, vanity, anything that sounded less dangerous than the truth. But by Thursday of that same week, Kayla texted me and said Rachel had asked for my number. I stared at that message for a long time. That was the first important decision I made, and I knew it when I made it. I could have said no. I could have protected my home, my wife, my child, and whatever decent version of myself I still believed in. Instead, I told Kayla it was fine. The second decision came slower, but it came. Rachel texted me later that day. She said seeing me at the party had shaken her more than she expected. We started with harmless things, the kind of cautious conversation two people use when they both know the real subject is somewhere else. We talked about life, kids, work, how much time had passed. After 20 minutes, the careful version of the conversation was dead, and we were both talking around the same wound. I told her my body had gone weak when I saw her. She told me she had almost backed out of the party after finding out I would be there. That should have been where I stopped. Instead, I started waiting for her messages. I felt my mood change when my phone lit up. I carried her words around all day like a secret heat under my shirt. That is when I understood something ugly about myself. It is possible to be grateful for your life and still be vulnerable to the part of you that wants to reopen what never healed right. By the time a month had passed, I asked to see her in person. She hesitated. She asked whether it was a good idea, and even that question had too much truth in it, because people do not ask that unless they already know the answer is no. At first, she said she would have to bring one of her boys with her because she could not leave him anywhere. I said that was fine. I would have said anything to make the meeting happen. We agreed to meet near the transit station on the south side of town. When I pulled up and saw she was alone, my heart kicked hard enough to make me grip the steering wheel. She got in the car and told me she had left her son with her mother for a little while. She said it like she was confessing something before I had even asked. I drove us to a diner a few miles away because it was public enough to feel safe and far enough to feel separate from real life. We sat in a booth by the window and started talking like two people trying to catch up on years in under an hour. What I remember most is not even the words. It is the way we looked at each other while saying them. She told me she had cried when her father found out about us back then. She told me she used to hear a motorcycle pass her street and run to the window hoping it was me. When she said that, something in me dropped. I had spent so long carrying my version of those years that hearing hers made the old story feel newly alive and newly cruel. I told her I had ridden by more times than she probably knew. She looked down, smiled without any happiness in it, and said she knew. There are moments when two adults stop pretending the past is past. That was one of them. I kissed her in the parking lot after we left the diner. I know how wrong that sounds because it was wrong. I had a wife at home. She had a husband and children. But I'm not going to clean this up now just because it would make me look better. I kissed her because all the years between us collapsed in that hour, because the feeling came back ugly and strong and immediate, and because some part of me had been waiting for permission to do exactly that since I was 19. Afterward, I drove her back and spent the whole ride vibrating with the kind of adrenaline that makes a man feel both younger and more ashamed at the same time. That should still have ended it. It did not. We started messaging in a way that left no room for lies about what was happening. Then we met again. The second time was not just kissing. By then, whatever line I had told myself I would never cross had already been crossed the first time I let her back into my head. The rest was just the body catching up to the betrayal the mind had already approved. The affair started there. I hated that word even while living inside it, but that is what it was. We saw each other when we could. We built excuses. We lied by omission first, then by design. I started pulling away from Rose at home without fully admitting why. I would dodge her touch some nights because my guilt made me stiff, then resent the guilt because it interfered with what I wanted. Rachel said things had gone cold in her marriage a long time before I came back into the picture. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was only the truth that mattered most in those stolen hours. Either way, the more we saw each other, the more our old story stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like destiny, which is one of the most dangerous lies two selfish people can tell themselves when innocent people are sleeping in the next room. We talked openly about leaving. That is the part people always think comes later, after months or years. Sometimes it comes early, while the fantasy is still strong enough to outrun the wreckage behind it. We started speaking as if our lives were just badly arranged furniture, and all we had to do was move a few pieces to make room for the truth. The third important decision was not one clean moment. It was a chain of them. Every time I answered her, every time I drove to see her, every time I chose the lie that protected the next meeting. Decision after decision, all adding up to the same thing. Then one afternoon her husband found out. Maybe he had already been suspicious. Men usually know before they have proof. Rachel was getting into my car when he pulled up behind us. I saw him in the mirror first, then saw her freeze. For 1 second, I thought he was going to drag me out through the driver's side door. I braced for it. Instead, he got out, looked straight at Rachel, and told her to get out of my car and come with him. His 2 boys were in the back seat of his truck. That was the image that changed everything. Not his anger, not the fact that we had been caught. The children. Rachel saw them, and the whole fever broke across her face. Whatever she had been prepared to risk for me did not survive seeing her sons there, strapped in and watching. She got out of my car and went with him. I sat there gripping the wheel so hard my hands hurt, full of fury and humiliation and a kind of childish helplessness I hated in myself. I called Kayla afterward because by then she knew more than she should have known, and I needed somebody to tell me what I could not see. Later she called back and said there had been a huge fight, but in the end, Rachel's husband was willing to forgive her if she cut me off completely. I waited to hear from Rachel. Days went by. Then she sent a message. She said we had to stop. She said he was giving her another chance and she had promised to end all contact with me. She said she was deleting my number. She asked me to understand that she was doing it for her children. I read that message over and over until the words started losing shape. Then she blocked me, not just directly, through Kayla too. She shut every door at once, the way people do when leaving even one crack open might pull them back into the fire. I wanted to answer right away. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to tell her she was making the same mistake twice, first with her father, now with this man, and that if she walked away again she would spend the rest of her life wondering what would have happened if she had chosen me. I typed half of that. Then I deleted it. That was my limit. Or at least the last one I could still recognize as a limit. I did not want to drag her children into more damage than we had already caused. I did not want to be the man begging a mother to choose him over the 2 little boys who had been staring from the back seat while their world cracked open. So I sent something smaller, weaker, more pathetic than what was really in me. I told her I understood. I told her to take care of herself. I told her I would always love her. She did not answer. That silence did something ugly to me. It left too much room for the old story to wake back up in the worst possible way. I started replaying everything from the beginning, not like a man trying to learn from his choices, but like a man trying to find somebody else to blame for all of them. I went back to that fence. I went back to her father's voice telling me to stay away. I went back to the months she was locked down and the year that swallowed us. I told myself that if he had not interfered back then, none of this would have happened now. I told myself we would have built a life together before anybody else got in the way, before there were marriages and children and all the knots adult life ties around people. That story comforted me because it made me tragic instead of guilty. The problem with comforting lies is that they can sit beside truth for a long time, before you force them apart. For days I walked around with my phone in my hand, checking it even though I knew she had blocked me. I slept badly. I snapped at Rose over stupid things, then hated myself for it because she had not known what I had been doing while standing in our kitchen asking whether I wanted coffee. My daughter would run to me with some toy in her hand, and I would smile and pick her up and feel like the worst kind of fraud, a man splitting himself into pieces and hoping the people who loved him would never compare them. I thought about driving by Rachel's mother's place. I thought about asking Kayla to intervene again. I thought about waiting outside somewhere I knew Rachel might be. I did none of those things. Not because I was noble, because I knew that if I saw her again too soon, I would make everything worse. For her, for me, for everyone attached to us. So I did what weak men often do when force is no longer possible. I stayed outwardly still and let the obsession keep moving inside me. That was the state I was in when the second wave hit, because losing her again was one thing. Starting to understand what that loss was going to cost me at home was something else. Continued from your uploaded base story and official prompt. The second wave was my own house. It started small. Rose asked me one night why I had been so far away lately, and I told her I was tired. She asked if money was getting to me, and I said maybe. She asked if something had happened at work, and I said no. Every answer I gave her was close enough to real life to sound believable, which somehow made me hate myself more. She stood there in the kitchen in sweatpants and one of my old shirts, looking at me with real concern. And all I could think was that I had turned into the kind of man who could take a good woman's worry and use it as cover. I started staying later at work when I did not have to. I sat in parking lots longer than necessary before going inside. I would turn the car off and just stare through the windshield at our apartment building, trying to become the version of myself that belonged there before I walked in. Some nights I could do it for an hour. Some nights not even that was enough. The worst part was that nothing at home was ugly. Rose was not cruel. She was not cold. She was not some woman I had married out of obligation and stopped loving years earlier. She was decent. She was loyal. She had given me a daughter. That made my betrayal feel less like a mistake and more like rot. A week after Rachel blocked me, Rose reached for me in bed and I flinched. It was small. So small maybe another woman would have missed it. Rose did not. She pulled her hand back right away and asked what that was supposed to mean. I said it was nothing, just stress. She lay there silent for a while, then turned away from me. I watched the shape of her back in the dark and knew something had shifted. After that, the questions became sharper, not constant. Rose was not the type to scream every night or create drama out of air. That almost made it harder. She would ask at the wrong time, which was really the right time, because guilt never arrives when you are ready for it. She asked while folding laundry if I was happy. She asked while washing dishes whether I still loved her. She asked one Saturday morning, when our daughter was watching cartoons on the floor, if there was someone else. That question sat between us like a live wire. I told her no. I told it fast enough to sound practiced, and she noticed that too. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded once in a way that did not mean she believed me. It meant she had heard the answer and was deciding what to do with it. That look stayed with me all day. By evening, I'd almost talked myself into confessing everything just to stop living split in half. But confession is not pure when part of you wants relief more than accountability, and I knew that. So I kept quiet. Then Kayla made things worse without meaning to. She called me one night after 9. Rose was in the living room with our daughter, helping her put together some cheap little puzzle from a fast food kids meal. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked down, saw Kayla's name, and my stomach dropped. I let it ring once too long, Rose noticed. I answered and walked out onto the balcony before the second ring ended, which was probably the most suspicious thing I could have done short of saying Rachel's name out loud. Kayla was crying. That scared me. I thought for a second something had happened to Rachel. Something terrible, some final disaster that would drag everything into daylight whether I wanted it or not. Instead, Kayla started apologizing. She said she should never have gotten involved, never passed numbers, never covered for meetings, never let herself believe this would somehow lead to something good. She said Rachel's husband had tightened everything. She said Rachel was miserable. She said maybe it was better if I let it go for real this time. I told her I had no choice. That was when Rose opened the balcony door. She did not say anything. She just stood there, waiting. I ended the call too fast, and that was enough. She asked who it was. I said Kayla. She asked why I needed to step outside to talk to my cousin. I said because our daughter was right there. She asked what was so serious. I said family stuff. Rose looked at me like she was putting pieces together and hated the picture. That night turned into our first real fight in years. Not loud at first. Low voices, the kind people use when they do not want a child in the next room to hear the floor giving way under her family. Rose said I had been gone for weeks, even when I was physically present. She said I was lying about something, and it was insulting that I kept pretending she was stupid enough not to feel it. I denied it again. She asked if Kayla had anything to do with some woman from my past, because I had looked strange at that birthday party, and even stranger after. When she said that, my whole body went cold. I had not realized she had seen that much. I said she was imagining things. That was the wrong answer. Her face changed, not hurt at first. Anger. She told me not to do that to her, not to stand there and make her feel crazy because I did not have the nerve to tell the truth. I still did not confess. I wish I could say that was because I wanted to protect her. It was because I wanted a few more hours with the lie. Rose slept on the couch that night. The next morning she acted normal in front of our daughter, which was worse than screaming would have been. She packed a lunch for the kid. She asked me whether I could stop by the grocery store after work. She moved around our kitchen with this frightening calm that made me realize she had crossed into a place beyond simple suspicion. She was observing now, taking inventory, waiting. People like to imagine the collapse of a family happens in one giant scene. A lot of the time it happens in careful silence first. I tried to cut off anything that tied me back to Rachel. I deleted messages that were already useless. I erased call logs. I told Kayla not to call unless it was an emergency. I even convinced myself for 2 days that I could bury the whole thing, focus on work, show up at home properly, and maybe the damage would stop spreading. That was the surface version. The real version was uglier. I was not grieving just Rachel. I was grieving the version of myself that had felt most alive with her, and I was angry at everybody who stood between me and that feeling, including the woman I had chosen and the child I loved. That is not pretty, it is just true. Then Rose found the first piece of hard evidence. It was not some dramatic lipstick stain or a hotel receipt left in my pocket. It was a message thread I had missed, because in my panic to erase the obvious things, I forgot one old conversation stored under a different contact name. Rachel had sent a short message days earlier, before the blocking, saying she hated how much she missed me and wished life had happened differently. I had not even answered it because by then things were already spiraling, but Rose found it while using my phone to call her sister when hers had died. She came into the bedroom holding my phone in both hands like it was something dirty. I saw my future in her face before she said a word. She asked me who Emily was. I did not answer fast enough. Then she asked why Emily was saying she wished life had happened differently, and why my reply from earlier in the thread said I had waited for her longer than she knew. Our daughter was in the living room. The TV was on. I could hear some bright cartoon music filtering down the hall, while my wife stood in front of me shaking with the effort of not breaking apart loud enough for a child to hear. I told her to lower her voice. That made her laugh once, like I had just said the most offensive thing possible. Then everything came out the wrong way, not as a clean confession, not as an honest sequence, in pieces, in self-protection, in corrections after denials stopped working. Rose kept asking questions, and every answer I gave led to a worse one. Who was she? Someone I knew years ago. Did you see her again? Yes, more than once. Did you sleep with her? I did not answer that first time either, and the silence answered for me. How long? A few weeks. Were you going to leave me? I said I did not know, which was somehow crueler than either yes or no. Rose covered her mouth with one hand and started crying without making any real sound. I will never forget that. I have seen people sob, scream, throw things, collapse. But there is something about the way a person cries when they are trying not to let the child in the next room hear that makes the pain look almost formal, like the body has turned into a locked room filling with water. Rose kept asking why. Not in some dramatic way. Just why? Why would you do this to us? Why would you risk our daughter for some woman from years ago? Why was I not enough? Why did you lie to my face? I did not have answers that were fit to give another human being. I told her it had gotten out of control. I told her Rachel and I had history. I told her seeing her again had brought everything back. Every sentence sounded pathetic even while I was saying it. History, feelings, confusion. Those words are so weak beside the sound of a woman asking whether the life she has built with you has been real. Rose said something then that still sits in me. She said, "I could have survived being poor with you. I could have survived stress. I could have survived you being lost. But I cannot survive being made into a fool in my own home." That was the moment the story stopped being a private tragedy in my head and became what it really was. Damage. Rose did not throw me out that night because it was too late. Our daughter was there, and in real life, people do not always know what to do with the first blast of the truth. She told me to sleep on the couch. The next day, she took our daughter to her mother's house and stayed there all afternoon. When she came back, she had a legal pad with notes on it. That sight terrified me more than tears had. She had questions, practical ones this time. Was the affair over? Yes. Had Rachel's husband found out? Yes. Had Rachel chosen to stay with him? Yes. Was I still in contact with her? No. Did I want to fix this marriage, or did I want to spend the next year lying until I found another excuse to blow up our lives? I said I wanted to fix it. I meant it in that moment, though even then there were parts of me still grieving what I had lost with Rachel more actively than what I was trying to save with Rose. Rose saw that too. She said she would not beg for a husband. She said if we were going to try, then I was going to tell her the truth every time, even when it made me look bad. And if I lied once more, she was done. She wanted details. Not every physical detail, but enough to know the shape of what she was being asked to forgive. That was one of the longest nights of my life. Every answer cost something. Every correction after a partial answer cost more. By the time the sky outside the blinds started going gray, Rose looked older. So did I. We tried. That is important because the easy version of this story would be for my marriage to end right there, cleanly, like punishment arriving exactly on schedule. Real life was messier. Rose did not want our daughter to grow up in a broken home if there was any real chance to avoid it. I did not want to lose my family. There was rent to pay, routines to maintain, birthdays coming, doctor appointments already scheduled. 2 sets of grandparents connected to one little girl who still thought her father hung the moon. So we tried. Trying looked less noble up close. It looked like me handing over my phone whenever Rose asked. It looked like her checking my face when it buzzed. It looked like me driving straight home every day and feeling watched because I had earned being watched. It looked like her touching me sometimes, as if testing whether my body still belonged to our marriage. It looked like her pulling back when something in my hesitation betrayed me. It looked like 1,000 tiny moments of normal life made jagged by memory. At first I thought surviving the confession had been the hard part. It was not. The hard part was waking up every day to the consequences of being known correctly. Rose asked for counseling through our church, then changed her mind because she did not want some smiling couple in a beige office telling her to breathe through betrayal. She talked instead to her sister, to her mother, maybe to one close friend. I do not know. I did know that my name had changed in rooms I was not in. I could feel it. I would walk into family gatherings and catch pauses that were too quick. Her brother shook my hand one Sunday with a grip just a little too tight. Her mother stopped meeting my eyes for long. Nobody publicly humiliated me. In a way, that was worse. Their restraint made me feel the full shape of what I had done. My daughter sensed the tension before she understood it. She started asking why Mom was sad. She asked once why Dad slept on the couch sometimes. Rose said I had fallen asleep watching TV. Our daughter nodded like that made sense and went back to coloring. A week later, she drew a picture of the 3 of us in front of a house and handed it to me with a smile. I took it to work and cried in my truck during lunch. That was the loss that left the mark. Not Rachel blocking me, not even Rose finding out. It was the moment I realized my selfishness had reached all the way into my daughter's little made-up world and put cracks in it. Around then, Kayla called again. This time I answered in front of Rose and put it on speaker, because secrecy was poison now. Kayla sounded embarrassed. She said Rachel wanted to know if my wife had found out. Rose walked out of the room before I could answer. I told Kayla yes, she had, and told her never to contact me about Rachel again. Kayla said she was sorry, said she had only asked because Rachel was worried. Worried. That word lit something foul in Rose when I repeated the call later. She said Rachel was worried now, after lying down with somebody else's husband and then disappearing behind her own kids and marriage. Rose was not wrong. I wanted to defend Rachel anyway. I wanted to say it had not been that simple. I wanted to say we had history, that feelings had been real, that Rachel had been trapped too. Instead, I kept my mouth shut because I could tell that if I defended Rachel in my wife's kitchen, whatever chance we still had would die right there. But silence does not erase where the heart still leans. Rose knew I was still somewhere else part of the time. She knew it in the blank moments. She knew it in the way some songs on the radio made me reach too fast to change the station. She knew it in the way I stiffened whenever Kayla's name came up. Once, about 2 months after the confession, she asked me straight out whether I was mourning Rachel more than the damage I had done here. I said no. Then I looked at Rose and realized that was not fully true. I corrected myself. I told her I did not know how to separate the two yet. That was a brutal answer, but at least it was honest. Rose stood there for a second with tears in her eyes and said that if I did not learn fast, she would do the separating for me. That was the closest we came to ending. For the next several weeks I went harder at being present. Not performative, not in some grand gesture way, smaller than that. I made breakfast. I took my daughter to the park on Saturdays. I sat at the kitchen table with Rose after our daughter fell asleep and answered questions I hated answering. I let Rose rage when rage came. I listened when she wanted to list every promise I had broken. I let her tell me what she imagined had happened between me and Rachel in moments she could not sleep. Some of what she imagined was wrong. A lot of it was close enough to leave bruises anyway. There is no clean dignity in earning your way back from betrayal. It is repetitive, humiliating, slow, and still not guaranteed. Around Christmas, things softened just enough for me to breathe again. Rose laughed once at something I said without stopping herself first. We decorated the apartment. Our daughter made paper snowflakes. Rose and I even sat together on the couch one night and watched some stupid holiday movie while she rested her feet in my lap. I remember thinking, maybe we are actually going to make it. Maybe the worst has already happened. Then in January I saw Rachel again. Not planned, not arranged, not fate in any romantic sense, just bad luck and a city small enough for old sins to cross paths in grocery store aisles. I was in a supermarket on my way home from work, still in boots and a work jacket, trying to decide between 2 brands of cereal my daughter liked, when I looked up, and there she was at the end of the aisle with one hand on a shopping cart. She looked thinner, tired too, not wrecked, not broken, just worn down in the face, the way young mothers sometimes do when life has turned practical faster than they expected. One of her boys was in the cart seat. The other stood beside her holding a box of crackers. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then her older son asked if they could get cookies. That snapped the world back into place. Rachel looked away first. She told him no, maybe next time, then glanced at me again with that same old thing in her eyes, the same recognition, the same ache, only now mixed with fear. She did not come closer. I did not either. I gave a small nod. She gave one back. Then she turned her cart and went the other way. That was all. It should have been nothing. It wrecked me for days, because seeing her there with the children made everything brutal in a different way. It killed the fantasy version for a moment and replaced it with something harder to dramatize. Rachel was not some frozen girl from the porch waiting for me at 19. She was a mother in a grocery store, choosing between what her kids wanted and what she could afford, moving fast because dinner still had to happen after this, and laundry was probably waiting at home, and her husband might or might not know she had seen me. She looked real. She looked tired. She looked unavailable not because of some cruel father or controlling husband or bad timing, but because life had moved and made claims on both of us we could not pretend away anymore. When I got home that night, Rose took one look at me and asked what had happened. I thought about lying. Instead, I told her the truth. I said I had run into Rachel at the store. Rose closed her eyes like she had been struck somewhere internal. She did not scream. She just asked if I had spoken to her. I said no. Rose asked if seeing her changed anything for me. I hesitated, which was answer enough. Then I said yes and no. It made things clearer in one way and more painful in another. Rose went very still. She said she was tired of living in a marriage haunted by a woman who was not even in it anymore. She said she could forgive what had happened, maybe, with time, but she could not keep competing with a ghost I kept feeding. She asked if I loved Rachel. I said yes. Then I added that I also loved Rose. That was one truth too many for one room. Rose started crying again, this time openly, not caring if the walls heard. She said that was exactly the problem. If my love could split like that, then maybe what I felt for her had never been safe in the first place. I tried to explain, but explanation is a poor substitute for repair. Every sentence sounded like I was asking to keep more than I had any right to keep. Rose told me to leave for the night, so I did. I drove around for 2 hours with nowhere to go, then ended up at my parents' place. I told them Rose and I were going through something. My mother knew immediately it was worse than I was saying. Mothers usually do. I slept in my childhood room and stared at the same ceiling I had once stared at as a 19-year-old, thinking Rachel was the center of everything. That irony was not lost on me. The next morning, my father drove me to a diner before work. He did not force me to talk. He ordered coffee, waited, and finally said that men like to think the biggest mistake is the moment of cheating, but often the bigger mistake is still worshipping the feeling after it has already destroyed what it touched. That sentence got through to me in a way sermons and self-hatred had not. Maybe because he was not trying to sound wise. He was just tired, disappointed, and old enough to know what obsession looks like when a younger man is dressing it up as destiny. I went home that evening and told Rose something I should have understood earlier. I said I had been using Rachel as a way to keep avoiding the full ugliness of my own choices. It was easier to make her the lost love, the unfinished story, the almost life stolen by her father, because that version made me feel tragic instead of accountable. The truth was that even if Rachel and I had loved each other once, what we had done in the present was not noble. It was selfish. It had innocent people standing around the edges bleeding for something they did not choose. I told Rose I did not expect those words to fix anything, but I was done romanticizing it in front of her or inside myself. She listened. That mattered. She did not melt. She did not come running back into my arms because I had finally found better language for the damage. But she listened, and that was the first real opening we had in months. Rose said she appreciated hearing me call it what it was. She said that for a long time, what hurt almost as much as the affair itself was watching me protect its meaning. Protecting the meaning meant protecting Rachel. Protecting Rachel meant leaving Rose alone in the ugliest part of the truth. That conversation did not save us in one night. Nothing did. But it changed the direction. After that, recovery stopped being about whether I could get through a day without contacting Rachel, and started becoming about whether I could live honestly inside the life I still had. I stopped talking about her father. That was another hard shift. For months, maybe years if I am honest, I had used that man as the main villain in the story because he was easy to hate. He had threatened me, shut Rachel down, controlled her, and in many ways he had helped plant the conditions that made the whole thing feel unfinished. But he was no longer the active force ruining my life. I was. Once I accepted that, something in me got quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter. Rose and I kept going. Some days were decent. Some days were miserable. She would be kind for 3 days, then cold for 2. She would ask a calm question over breakfast and be furious by dinner because a memory had hit her at the wrong time. Sex came back slowly and awkwardly. Trust came back even slower. Our daughter kept growing because children do not pause for adults to clean up their messes. She learned to write her name. She lost a front tooth. She started kindergarten. Through all of that, Rose and I were either rebuilding or pretending well enough to keep the roof steady above her. About a year after everything blew up, Kayla ran into my mother somewhere and sent word that Rachel was still with her husband. That information landed softer than I expected. No great stab, no collapse, just a long exhale and a heaviness I could finally carry without needing to turn it into a myth. I pictured her in some apartment or little house, making dinner, folding little shirts, moving through the same practical life that had once felt like the enemy and was now just reality. Maybe she still thought of me sometimes. Maybe she did not. Maybe she only thought of me when a motorcycle passed. Maybe even that had faded. I had no right to know. The more time passed, the clearer one thing became. Rachel and I had loved each other most fiercely in spaces where real life had not yet fully tested us. First as teenagers being pulled apart before we could become ordinary together. Then as adults inside secrecy, adrenaline, memory, and stolen time. That does not make it fake. It does make it incomplete. There is a difference. I had spent too long refusing to admit that difference because the fantasy of what we might have been was easier to worship than the difficult, unglamorous work of showing up for what I had actually built. Rose never forgot. I do not say that dramatically. She simply did not. Some betrayals do not leave a burning wound forever. They leave scar tissue. Years later, you can still touch the place and feel how the body healed wrong. Rose stayed. That was grace, stubbornness, practicality, love, maybe all of it. But staying is not the same as erasing. There are things she still does because of me. She still glances at my phone screen sometimes when it lights up. She still goes quiet if an old story comes up about people reconnecting after years apart. Once, at some cousin's barbecue, somebody joked about high school sweethearts finding each other again on Facebook, and Rose stood up to refill her drink, even though her glass was still half full. That was my consequence. Not a dramatic downfall. Not divorce papers slapped on a table, not fists in a parking lot. A more durable punishment than that. I got to keep the life I almost ruined, but I had to keep it knowing exactly what I had done to it. As for Rachel, the truth is I stopped asking around. That was another decision I made, and one of the few I am still proud of. I could have kept feeding the wound through Kayla, through family gatherings, through side comments and accidental updates. I did not. I told my mother once that if anybody mentioned Rachel around me, I did not want details. My mother looked relieved in a way that told me she had been waiting a long time to hear that. Years passed. My daughter got older. Rose and I bought a modest little house after saving forever. I changed jobs. My hands got rougher. My back started hurting in the mornings for reasons no doctor needed to explain. Life lost some of its fever and became what most real lives become. Routine stitched together by bills, school events, family dinners, occasional laughter, occasional distance, and the 1,000 repetitions that either kill a marriage or make it sturdier. Ours did both, depending on the season. There were still nights, not many, but some, when I would lie awake and think about Rachel. Not the affair, not the motel rooms or parking lots or secret messages. Earlier than that. The porch, the park, the motorcycle. Her at the corner waiting for me with that look on her face, like the world had not started closing around us yet. I learned not to stay there long. Memory can be a place, and some places are bad for you no matter how beautiful they seem in the dark. The hardest truth I ever had to admit was this. I had spent years believing the deepest wound in my life was being kept away from the person I thought I was meant to be with. But the deeper wound was what I became when I let that belief excuse too much. I used it to blame a father, then timing, then fate, then marriage, then children, then everybody except the man in the middle of it, making one selfish decision after another. Once I finally stopped doing that, the story changed shape. It hurt less as a romance and more as a warning. That does not mean I stopped loving Rachel in whatever stubborn corner of me had loved her all along. It means I stopped kneeling to that feeling like it was sacred, just because it was intense. There is a difference there too. A few summers ago I was stopped at a red light and heard a motorcycle somewhere behind me. The sound cut through traffic and heat and years all at once. For a second I was 19 again, hands on vibrating handlebars, riding toward a porch and a girl who had no idea how much trouble one smile was about to cost us. Then the light changed. The car behind me honked. I drove on. That is probably the closest thing to closure I have ever had. No grand reunion. No final confrontation with her father. No scene where Rachel and I get to say everything we never said. Life does not owe those moments just because the heart thinks it deserves them. Her father is old by now, maybe softer, maybe not. Her husband, if she is still with him, wakes up beside a woman he once forgave for choosing another man long enough to nearly blow up their family. Rose wakes up beside a man who once betrayed her and then spent years trying to become worth staying for. And I wake up beside the life I actually built, not the one I kept imagining was stolen from me. That is the part that took me the longest to understand. I was not robbed only by other people. I did some of the robbing myself. If you ask me now whether Rachel and I were ever really supposed to be together, I cannot give you the answer I used to give. Back then I would have said yes without hesitation. I would have said we were kept apart by fear, by parents, by bad timing, by other people's rules. Now I think something harsher and probably truer. I think we were real. I think we were powerful. I think we were unfinished. And unfinished love can feel bigger than completed love because it never has to survive ordinary life long enough to disappoint you. That is what made it so dangerous. It stayed perfect in the places where reality never got full access to it. Meanwhile, the love that actually fed my child, paid my rent, sat with me in flu season, buried grandparents, fought with me over money, forgave me when it should not have had to, and kept standing in front of me asking for honesty instead of fantasy, that love looked smaller only because it was doing the heavy lifting of being real. I did not understand that when I was younger. I do now. Still, I would be lying if I said Rachel left no permanent mark. She did. Some people become part of the private architecture of your life, even when they do not end up living in it. You measure time against them. You measure choices against them. Sometimes you even measure pain against them. That does not mean they are your destiny. It just means they got in deep enough to leave a shape behind. Rachel did. Rose did too. The difference is that one became a shape I carried, and the other became the person who had to live with the man carrying it. That is why this story does not end with me talking about fate anymore. Fate is too clean a word for what happened. What happened was desire, timing, weakness, memory, ego, fear, opportunity, and the terrible ease with which people can turn an old wound into a fresh excuse. What happened was that I loved a girl, lost her, built another life, reopened the loss, and nearly burned down the life I actually had because I mistook intensity for truth. If I sound less romantic now, that is because romance nearly ruined me. The strangest part is that I still think Rachel loved me in her own way, and I still think I loved her. I'm not rewriting that because it would make the ending neater. But love by itself proves very little. Love does not automatically make people right for each other. Love does not protect children. Love does not pay for what it breaks. Love does not stop being selfish just because it feels sincere. I learned that too late, and Rose learned it because of me. So when I think about Rachel now, which happens less often and hurts less sharply, I do not ask the question that used to chase me for years. I do not ask why life brought us back together only to tear us apart again. That question kept me trapped because it assumes the point of love is always to win. Maybe the point was uglier and simpler than that. Maybe getting her back for a little while was never proof that she was mine. Maybe it was proof that I still had enough unresolved hunger in me to destroy something good if I kept feeding it. That is the consequence I cannot undo. That is the echo of the original wound. And that is why, out of everything I lost, the thing I miss most is not Rachel. It is the man I could have been if I had understood sooner that some loves are not meant to be followed, only survived. What would you do in this situation? Be honest, or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.